Hello and welcome to Community Topics, number 38 of Dualistic Unity. I am just interested to hear where this conversation ends up going. I'm excited for it. We never really step into these with too much of an idea of exactly the direction, but I think this one will be fun to dig into.
And I remember when I was in high school, I was told in science class that the brain adapts and gets better at whatever it is that we put our attention into repetitively. And I remember very specifically at that moment getting very excited by that simple fact because it indicates that we can just put time and attention into things, and that's how we will eventually get better at it. We don't actually have to measure our progress, just necessarily keep going. But it dawned on me that my brain is always going to adapt according to what I'm looking at. And if I'm always looking at the world in a certain way, if I'm always looking at people in a certain way, if I'm always looking at my life in a very specific way and in very specific areas, then my brain isn't going to adapt to other areas that I'm not looking at. And so it is possible that I am going to miss whole worlds of knowledge and experience that I don't even know are there. And yet, in those worlds, I could be learning more about myself. I could be learning more about life. I could be learning more about communication. It is entirely possible that there are lessons I just don't see because I am too attached to the world that I'm currently learning from. And so it's important to go into other worlds, as it were. And on that note, this Community Topics episode is about the influences of music on humanity. And I'm going to open this up with the possibility that the experience of music, the experience of playing music, as well as listening to music, playing music with someone else, is in fact another world entirely. That it is a different experience that we can learn from and interact with and gain insight from. And I say that specifically because music, oddly enough, does not have a specific part of the brain that it impacts. It, in fact, impacts many different parts of the brain. It activates memory and emotion. Pitch and tone are translated by a different part of the brain than rhythm is, for example. So it's a very immersive experience that activates a lot of what we are. And that's the reason that we enjoy it, because unlike other things that humanity has learned to do over time, music does not actually serve any purpose in terms of our survival. So there is something else about the experience of music that continues to draw humanity to it. And so I find that fascinating. And so I think that's where we're going to take off today, that music is in itself another evolution to the experience of our existence. And if it is, what else could be?
Oh, man. All right. I am liking where you kicked this off because that was way more than any of the notes I had written down. But to recognize that music doesn't have, it also just doesn't have a destination ever. Like it's a complete thing in and of itself. Like there's no, when you're listening to a song, there's not, as Alan Watts said many times, like there's not a desire to get to the end. There's an enjoyment of the experience. And so whether it's singing or dancing or life, like life is that. It's not about getting to a destination. It's about the dance and living it experience to experience, moment to moment. And because we can, once you can recognize that there's no beginning and no end, like the moment that you're in is the extent of that. And so music is almost like in the puddle of life. It's like a reflection of that in another direction or another puddle within it as an expression of it. And because it's that fullness, it's like another variation or iteration of our experience of reality. And so tapping into that is like tapping into, people talk about other dimensions. Could it be that things like that are other dimensions that we're tapping into because they aren't, it's like they're whole on their own. And so with that, the wholeness on its own of being us in, quote unquote, our reality, it's a wholeness there, but it's again, it's not that it's disconnected, but it's another iteration of an expression of the wholeness of reality itself.
And here's a good argument for that, because there's a lot of research going into the impact of music on our brain as a whole. Music actually has a positive impact on people who are on the extreme end of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. So get this, people on the extreme end of Alzheimer's are completely unresponsive. But if you put headphones on with their favorite music, they will actually start to respond, sometimes hum along, sometimes dance, sometimes sing to their favorite song. And it will last up to 10 minutes after the music has come off their ears. So their brain comes right back to life into an experience that they have been fully immersed in before. And it is very much like tapping into an entirely different dimension. They could not respond previously until they shed everything that goes with being attached to this dimension. But tapping into music, they were able to see who they were in the present without the narrative, and it was totally normal to do so. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, because with things, and we've talked about this before, with things like Alzheimer's, they're very much expressions of our mentality, our given mentality. And if there's like a sect, because in music and the wholeness of a song or anything, there's not a perceived division. Like the song is whole in itself. Like you need every single part to make it the song itself. And so it's almost like those things don't carry the weight. It's like on the spectrum of ego versus like the idea of yourself versus the reality of yourself. Like music, dancing, those sorts of things are on the side of the spectrum that is, pulling you more towards that. And so in our given mentality that's so far on the other end, things like, cancer, Alzheimer's, we've talked about it before, like those illnesses are expressions of an investment in a given mentality to some degree, be it like collective stress, individual stress, all of that plays parts in that. And so those are expressions of it. So it makes sense that something like that, like if you're in the depths of that as an expression of, that mentality that's very egotistical and, music lies on the other side, it's going to have a tug there and it almost lifts you up a tiny bit. For those listening, I got one hand above, one hand below, and it's like that music is pulling them up a bit, like that weight is being alleviated so they can actually function a bit, because there is so much weight to that illness. And with that, it alleviates just a little bit, and we see it. Like, and when the music stops, as you said, like I'd never heard that before. Holy fuck! After 10 minutes, after it ends, they're still up there, and it's like that 10 minutes is like the process of settling back down to the weight. Like that's the shift. But yeah, holy shit.
And I think a big part of that is the proximity to the moment that music takes us to. And what's interesting is that now they're able to do awesome things with MRI machines and whatnot, and they're able to watch the brain as we have an experience like listening to music, and they're able to compare it to other experiences, and as such they're able to actually notice certain things. And I thought this was fascinating, that the brain experiences expectation and anticipation as it listens to music. Because of course it does. It's trying to follow a beat. It's trying to follow a rhythm. And so it's trying to look for a pattern all the time, and it's expecting the next note to follow the pattern. And yet when it doesn't, we get, quote unquote, a dopamine hit because we get all excited by the difference, by the sudden surprise. And so it's the same thing we're doing all the time, but in a very short period of time, moment to moment to moment to moment to moment. Anticipation, surprise, anticipation, surprise, anticipation, surprise. And that is why music is so enjoyable, because you're not thinking like, oh, the big part's coming at the end. You're not. You're thinking about you're not even thinking, you're just feeling the next note. what the next note should be according to what you expect, and then it wasn't that. What a delightful surprise that was, right? And that's why it's so all-encompassing, is because it takes us so close to the present, because we're paying attention to the present. And so it's an entirely different way of experiencing what we experience all the time. And so we can learn about ourselves in that experience. And that's why I find it fascinating that playing guitar, for example, has certain benefits. You become better at problem solving, your memory improves, you become more intuitive, you get better with hand-eye coordination, things like that. Not only that, but guitar players who play together, their brains actually start to sync up over time. So they're able to communicate only through how the music is continuing on, because again, they're just jamming. There's no set rhythm, they're setting it as they go. And so their brains will actually sync, almost in the same way that it does when people are playing video games together, which is another thing that we covered in the previous community topics, right? And so that's another dimension. See what I'm saying? Is that there's so many different dimensions that we have access to that we can learn from, but that are ultimately different than the logical processing that we normally do about such and such down the street, or what we're going to do at work, or how our bills are going to get paid, or what's going to be on TV tonight. It's an immersive experience. And in that, we get to learn something else about ourselves and how we react to things in the moment. You know, which is, again, something that can be used against us to some degree. And what I mean is that, because this episode is about the influences of music on humanity, throughout history, music has been used in various different ways in order to either calm people down or incite violence, right? Which we know, a slow tempo, for example, typically is a relaxing thing, which is why they play it in airports, right? People who are panicking about flying, people who are agitated, people who are in a rush, people who are late for their appointment, things like that, they play slow music to calm those people down, right? Whereas if you have a population that you need to stir them up, you need to get them agitated, you start playing more drum beats, right? And it's because it changes the tempo, because we actually respond right down to the brainstem to music, right? And so our physiology will respond to a heightened tempo. Our heartbeat will change. How we breathe changes. So we're very much influenced by the music that we're listening to. It has a huge impact. If you don't believe me, watch a Disney movie and try not to cry.
Oh man, I have a lot of thoughts. I have a couple of them written down, but the like I'm seeing it almost it has such a massive impact because it's the closest to the root of what we are. Like being the here and now. Like I was seeing it coming through like a tunnel down into the depths of what we are, and it like hitting that spot because it's entirely in tune with that. And so, you know, at the depths of what you are, like the tiniest little degree at the extents of what you are, you know, being at the surface of what you are is going to be a massive shift and change. And the closer you are to that center point, the more the tiniest little thing is going to have impact. So it is used so often in those types of experiences. And with the instruments and the changing, and it's like we get to a certain point in our life and we do very, very few new things. And so you're saying all the benefits of like learning an instrument, and it's almost because, like we've used in the past, the being in the river, recognizing that you are the river, or being outside of it. And so as you stop changing, as you stop learning new things, it's you crawling out of the river and stagnating. And with that comes all of the consequences. So the benefits that you see is like, because you're learning something new and changing with that, you're getting back into the changing flow of reality. Like you're tapping back into the nature of change. Like you're almost allowing yourself to change despite it being uncomfortable, despite it being difficult at first. It's like you're feeling it because you're no longer stagnating so much. And we see it all the time. Like people, by the time they turn 20, 25, 30, like that fear of failure, that fear of judgment is so overwhelming that we just like, we do the full body clench and just stick to everything. Like it's very difficult to do any, like, leave a job, make a big change in your life and learn something new, especially though, because we fear that change so much. And we're so concerned about fucking idea of ourselves, and that hinders us. And so anytime you tap into something new, because it's never comfortable at first, and that shift is like, like learning a fucking instrument. It's like jumping in a cold river. And that discomfort that you feel, the difficulty that you have, the struggles that you have with it are like getting used to the temperature of the water until you're used to it. And then you're tapping in, and then you're remaining in that as you continue to learn. And music and instruments being a massive way to do that. And it can have such those benefits. It makes sense. It can have such strong impact because it is so close. It brings you so close to the core of what you are.
Exactly. And because it's so close to the core of what we are, there is in fact a lot of benefit to music. And what I mean is anything that we do repetitively and with a great deal of awareness changes our brain, right? Well, musicians actually have an enhanced corpus callosum, which is interesting. There is an enhanced connection between the two hemispheres of the brain. And it's because their brain is more active more often than not. This is why we're told to play classical music for children when they're young, right? And it's because it activates different parts of the brain. As I said earlier, rhythm activates a different part of the brain than pitch and tone. So you imagine how much of your brain is just dancing around with all this information, trying to communicate, not just in terms of music, but the emotions that music is tapping into. And this is why I've often sent kind of epic instrumental tracks to Andrew, because these are the tracks that I like listening to when I'm just kind of out on a walk in the background, because that epic music is going according to my life. And so it's way more impactful. Whereas if you watch a Disney movie, for example, that epic music is used to drive home a point that the narrative of the movie is focusing on as important. And so you wonder how much of what you think is important is the result of those moments and them just twanging away at your soul as they resonate with you with music. And so that's the danger in terms of music, is if you're not aware of your shit, then you can be influenced by it. If you're not aware of how afraid you can be, then a certain musical score can really up that fear. If you're not aware of how easily you can be soothed by music, then likely you're going to be soothed the next moment from the same movie. And they've got you, right? Now you're fully invested emotionally. And that's a beautiful thing. That's what I love about movies. Like, you can cry about a character who, at the end of the day, left, got paid very well, and went home. Right? But in the movie, you're just like, oh God, he's dying. And he's not, right? But you can get into it, and they know how to use music to basically help drive that home. They've gotten very good at it. Right. So yeah, there's definitely a lot. But one thing I wanted to say, because I find this fascinating, music activates so many parts of our brain because there are so many different things happening. And so our brain creates thicker synapses and becomes more communicative as a whole. But something that has a similar impact on us is socialization. Because in socialization, again, not that this is always the case, and this is true with music too, you can think about yourself a lot and be very bad at playing music. You can think about yourself a lot and be very bad at socialization, or you can let go and just get into the flow of one conversation to the other, adapt according to each and every moment. And it's very much like listening to music when you learn that being with a crowd of people is its own kind of song. And what's interesting is that a crowd of people can actually end up acting a lot like a chord, like a major chord versus a minor chord, for example. A major chord is very like, yeah, and a minor chord is kind of like, eh. A crowd feels very much the same way. It's just in how we look at it.
I wonder if we could take a measurement of different hums, like the hum of the crowd, like if there could, because there's plenty of things. There's like some what's it called, like a chromatic tuner or something like that, where it can recognize pitch, and like you can sing into it too. Usually they're for guitars and stuff to tune them, but you can sing into it and it can tell you. So I wonder if we measured a crowd and like the hum of the crowd, if we could get a sense of like what note they were hitting, and like measure mentalities off of that, like create a fucking Hawkins scale or some shit for like sound resonance based on pitch and key and all of that, because that's it. And it's interesting, like it'll, with the connection and what it's connecting you to and like the manipulation that music uses, like is it connecting it to the moment or is it connecting you to an emotion? And like if it's overlaid with like a manipulative emotion, it can drive that division further because I'm experiencing this. But if you're just, learning the guitar or doing something that's like involved in the experience, going on a walk and listening to epic music, like that drives home the here and now. And so that process is when your brain starts feeling, more connected, because it's another variation of this reality with the entire spectrum. Whereas a lot of the things that we do, we're like, oh, this is a right brain thing, this is a left brain thing, and it just like reinforces that division. Like our perception of there being a right and a left brain is almost like symbolic of, one perceived as two. And so as things only use one, it's almost like it could reinforce that division. And maybe in those manipulative movies it reinforces division because like both sides or one side is like stronger. I don't know, that might be just theory, but it's interesting how the utilization of both sides and like a lot of both sides can have that combining nature. Like that's very reflective of that. And depending on what it's focusing you on, like it can very, very quickly shift you either deeper into the moment or attached to some narrative of the experience that emotion or music incited.
Which is really important to keep in mind, considering that music also has this incredible experience on our perception of time in terms of memory, I guess. And what I mean is that if you hear a song that you haven't heard since you were a teenager, you're almost transported back to that feeling you had when you listened to it when you were a teenager. That is some strong shit. Like that's incredible how fast and almost involuntary that is. And it's because we were very much in the present when we heard that song or when we were listening to that song. And so our brain really tunes into it. Our memory really is there because we were there. But on that same token, that can be used against us. I mean, how many of us remember growing up as kids and listening to our national anthem each and every morning as we were going through some of the most emotional times of our life? Why do you think we get so emotional about the national anthem, whether we fought for the country or not? Right? And so it's just constantly drilled in as a background sound to this ongoing emotional experience. And so we almost get attached to it like we're attached to our childhood. It becomes a huge part of our identity.
Holy fuck. This is turning into like one of the better episodes we've done. I'm thinking we both went in like, what the fuck are we about to talk about? But holy shit, as you were talking about being transported back to an experience, like there's a song I listened to a bunch. It's a Numb Encore. It's a remix with Jay-Z's Encore and Linkin Park's Numb. That's a really good workout song. And it's like I listened to it on repeat when I first started working out. Like we had a little like weight set up in my basement when I was like 13, and I was like talking to my dad and I was like, I want to start trying stuff out. So he gave me a little workout program thing. He was like, yeah, have at it, don't hurt yourself, please. And started, and I would listen to that song a lot. And as you were talking, I was like back in that basement, back on the machine, could feel the machine like going down my back as I'm listening to this song. And I was like, holy shit, I gotta come back to this. I gotta respond eventually here. But it was like all the details, and even right now, fuck, as I'm talking, it's like all of the details are coming back. Like I can perfectly see that basement. And we moved out of that house when I was 15 or 16. And that was when I was 13. So that was 15 years ago. And I am fully in that experience, like in even the emotions, and like holy fuck, it really can do that. And that's, yeah, it makes sense if that's you're involved in it, because that was even that was like, that's kind of the turning year, 13, when you go from not having so much to like idea of yourself really starts to build. So yeah, because I wasn't, when I started doing that stuff, like I wasn't doing it trying to get anything. I just really, really liked the fact that I could do one weight one week and the next week I could do a little more. And that was just like blew my mind. It's like, that's cool. And that's like, because I was involved in that for the sake of doing it. It makes sense. But, oh, man, crazy.
It really is just a question of what can we experience in the present? And there's a lot, but it's about what brings us to the present. And this is why, martial arts are important to learn, depending on the martial art and the teacher, of course, and the intention behind it. You don't want to learn the martial art necessarily, go out there and kick some ass, but you want to learn more about your body, how you move, body awareness, as well as whether or not you're panicking, whether you're afraid, whether or not you're relaxed. These are all things that you can learn, but it's a process of your awareness. And so it's a totally different universe than the way that you're used to learning or experiencing. So the lesson behind all of this, I guess, if there is one, is that it's not the music, it's our attention on the music. It's our proximity to the moment that makes music so powerful. So imagine what our life would be if we could learn to listen to life and hear the song.
Because when you're paying attention, like you're experiencing a different reality than when you're not paying attention. Like there is a feeling you can get when you're just sitting in the spot, and it's like everything's the same, but everything's totally different at the same time. And it is like shifting realities. And so it makes sense that anything that brings your attention back to what is has that impact. Like it is a shift in reality, but at the same time, it's like it's that fine line, because if you're listening, say you're caught up in stuff like a story, like you just broke up with someone or going through some shit in like a relationship, super sad song talking about a boy and a girl, whatever comes up, like that can send you in that direction, like deeper into it. And so it really is like just a powerful tool that brings your attention closer to where you're going, almost like it sends it off in a sense. And so as you are paying attention, it can be a way, and I guess even beyond just what you're paying attention to, like it can shake you enough to pay attention. It's just, yeah, I guess it's just one of those things that gives you the opportunity if you're willing to do so.
And it's quite obvious in a physical sense as to how much it's setting you free, because you will actually dance. And I find that amazing, because will you dance without the music? Almost never. But once the music's playing, you almost can't help yourself. And so it really is just about being in that place that music takes you all the time, because when you're dancing, everything feels easy, doesn't it? You feel fluid and relaxed. You feel like you can move around. You're almost strutting through life because there's a soundtrack to it, you know? You don't need the music for that. There's always music. You are the music. It just comes down to paying attention, getting your preferences out of the way, and allowing your brain to take in the beat and observe all the little unexpected changes.
And I think that is a fantastic way to end off this episode that went surprisingly well. I think I had honestly the lowest expectations for the episode ever, and we're like digging into it, and now my entire perspective on music has changed. So I guess my intro made sense. I was excited to see where this went, because it was not in any direction that I thought. But wow, yeah, just keep on dancing, music or not. And this has been a fun one. I appreciate everyone for tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone.